why the German Tiger never became the hammer of the Wehrmacht. The participation in the war of the German heavy tank Tiger and its improved counterpart Tiger I remains the subject of debates among experts and historians. Some claim that both machines were engineering masterpieces of the Germans and, according to all predictions, should have reached the Urals, while others argue that technological advancements ultimately buried the unique combat machines on the battlefield, where it all started, contrary to many stories and movies. It should be said in advance that the effective actions and marches of tens of kilometers in a day were the result of Hitler's forces not so much because of the participation in the tank army's attack, but due to the unexpectedness of the attack itself. Clear coordination, planning, management, and the interaction of infantry, armored vehicles, and aviation largely determined the success of actions on the Eastern Front. However, the rapid offensive plan by the command of the German army was not realized. One of the main roles in the failure of the Blitzkrieg was played by the legendary Soviet tanks T-34 and KV-2, the use of which forced the German command to reconsider their views on tank construction. With the appearance of Soviet tanks on the battlefield, the PFU IMA PCPFYF, initially sent to the Eastern Front, experienced huge difficulties in destroying Soviet technology. Realizing that armored forces were failing and were about to lose the initiative, Hitler gave orders to start working on a breakthrough tank capable of sweeping away enemy armored vehicles and fortifications, allowing infantry to advance. The main feature of the new machine presented to the Führer was not so much the advanced German standards of armor and control system, but a fundamentally different gun. The 88 mm K-36 had significantly increased firepower characteristics and promised a huge advantage in battle. However, the Führer's decision to transfer the still unfinished machines to the front for experimental combat use has confused many. In particular, the leadership and engineering staff of the Henschel Company, whose tank prototype was eventually chosen by the Führer. It is worth noting that the unique design of the engine and transmission, as well as the abundance of electrical aids for the crew, did not perform as the Wehrmacht command had envisioned in battles. The hot summer of 1942, the new machine was named Passchafto UI Tiger, and the serial production of the tank with powerful armor and an 88 mm gun began in August 1942. In the same month, the first batch of machines was transferred to the Eastern Front, where they immediately entered an uneven battle with breakdowns. However, it is fair to note that the proportion of breakdowns in combat and malfunctions on the march was in most cases 30 to 70, and although historians, military experts, and well-known German tankers note that the percentage of malfunctions in combat was indeed low, it is worth separately discussing the operational characteristics of the Tiger. One of the most important qualities of any military equipment is the adaptation of the machine's design to field servicing. After all, the purpose of every tank is to fight, if necessary, and not to stand in the hangar. The Tiger, hastily thrown onto the Eastern Front, delighted tankers and mechanics with a huge number of mechanical breakdowns, for the repair of which individual parts, such as engines and transmission elements, had to be flown in directly from Germany. Overheating of the power plant, breakdowns of the electrical transmission, and damaged running gear were the minimum set of problems that German tankers and technicians had to deal with. For a smooth ride, German tankers paid the price of constantly breaking suspension, and these machines in a convoy had a whole range of restrictions during marches. Thus, German tank crews were strictly forbidden from making long marches with abrupt changes in engine speed. In simple terms, for the efficient and trouble-free transfer of such tanks along the roads in the eastern direction, it was necessary to pre-calculate and secure the route so that the personnel would not cause the engine to overheat and could move at a consistent speed. German tank crews were also instructed to refrain from frequent gear changes. The well-known German tanker Alfred Rubbel noted that for every hour of tank operation, 10 hours of maintenance are required, and after the transfer of a heavy tank battalion for 35-40 km, it would require no less than 2, in some cases 3 weeks of maintenance. Undoubtedly, in combat situations, these limitations were often disregarded. However, the fact that certain requirements and restrictions existed for Tiger tanks raises doubts about the reliability and sustainability of the design as a whole. One of the curious requirements from the manufacturer was the so-called dust elimination instructions for the roads along which such equipment had to be transferred, as well as recommendations for selecting the optimal route with the smoothest and cleanest roads. It is also worth noting that heavy and well-armed German tanks experienced problems not only in the harsh conditions of the Eastern Front, but also in other directions. A striking example in this regard is the 200-kilometer march of the tanks of the 508th Heavy Tank Battalion to the Italian city of Anzio in January 1944. The transfer of 45 tanks was carried out in accordance with all the norms and regulations of the manufacturer. But even without any enemy resistance, 27 tanks did not reach the destination. Subsequently, in the same year of 1944, the 504th Heavy Tank Battalion lost all 25 tanks on the retreat. The lack of timely evacuation is also a separate part of the Tiger tank story. Not evacuating them in a timely manner led to significant issues for the German army. 95 of cases. It was not possible to timely move and transport the 5710 machine to the unit's location, so the Tiger crews often simply destroyed their own tanks. However, German tankers, including famous tank aces like Otto Carius, believed until the end of their lives that reliability was not the main quality in such a machine. The main qualities of a tank are mobility and armament, Carius said it in one of his interviews, a smeared masterpiece on the canvas of war. After the first Tiger tanks came into the possession of Soviet specialists, the diagnosis of the big German cat was made almost immediately. However, it is worth noting that the early production Soviet T-34s indeed had significant problems with destroying the German tank. However, this concerns the ability of the 76 mm gun of the T-34 to penetrate the 100 mm frontal armor of the German. Almost immediately, when the T-34 and the first Tigers clashed in battle, tank battalion commanders in the Red Army adjusted the tactics of using Soviet tanks. A head-on encounter only occurred when there was no other choice. Mostly, Soviet tankers organized a kind of tank safari, a large hunt for German tanks from ambushes and strikes on the most vulnerable areas. The rear elements of the running gear and side projections, once the T-34-85 with a new gun appeared in the arsenal of Soviet tanks. The average Soviet tank and heavy German tank were virtually equal in firepower. It is best to avoid a direct comparison of the two tanks in this case, because they were created for completely different purposes. However, the Tiger, being as much a source of pride for the German military industry as the V-2 rocket, did not live up to the expectations placed on it. From the standpoint of the service of this tank as a gap plugger, which was the role of the German heavy tank battalions, yes, its use was justified. The intended purpose in this regard was worked out. For example, on the Kursk Bulge, these machines were used as a means of breakthrough, and they bore the main burden during the counteroffensive at Kharkov. German tankers loved these machines more than the Tiger, notes military historian Yuri Pasholok. In general, it is worth noting that the combat work of Tiger tanks, and even more so the short-term combat service of Tiger II, did not go as the Germans expected. This refers not only to the work on the Eastern Front, but also on other fronts. Historians note that in addition to mistakes in troop management, which the German commanders also made, heavy German tank battalions were knocked out without the use of anti-tank guns in actual combat. After studying the characteristics of the German tank, the Soviet and then the Allied command became convinced that it was possible to wear down and deprive the enemy of up to half of the tanks in a battalion not only through the expenditure of ammunition, but also through deception. According to specialists, tank battalions equipped with Tigers were often transferred to the most tank-dangerous directions. Therefore, all that was needed was to give disinformation that a certain number of our tanks would be in a certain area at a certain time. German heavy tank battalions were transferred not only by rail, but also on their own. And during the march, a significant amount of equipment broke down. The time gained was practically always used by Soviet and Allied forces either to launch an attack or simply to wait for supplies or repairs, points out historian Andrei Fomin. Wanted to do better. The analysis of data on losses, combat performance, reliability, cost, and operational characteristics allows for the assumption that the power of the heavy Tiger tank and the results of its combat performance are significantly exaggerated. Military historians and experts explain that the Fifth Symphony of the Wehrmacht was the medium German tank Panther, which caused the greatest number of problems not only for Soviet but also for Allied tank crews, and that the Tiger, at best, turned into a well-armored anti-tank gun, and after the appearance of the high-powered guns on the medium Soviet tanks, the tactics of using the German shock fists in the most dangerous areas practically became ineffective. Furthermore, the combat use of the Tiger on the Eastern Front was often accompanied not so much by mechanical problems as by the lack of suitable infrastructure for fast movement. For example, there were frequent cases when an entire battalion of 45 tanks could get stuck for 10-12 hours in one place simply because the only bridge across a small water obstacle was blown up by partisans. Christopher Wilbeck, a renowned American historian who wrote an entire scientific work on the use of German armor, calculated that a minimum of 40 of all Tiger tanks were lost due to damage, breakdowns, getting stuck in mud, or not being evacuated in time from the battlefield. The thick frontal armor, powerful 88 mm gun with high-velocity projectiles, technological advancements, and much more. In the case of the Tiger tank, weighed on one side of the scale. On the other side, there were design flaws and limitations in operation, which ultimately prevented the Tiger from becoming a true warhammer